Hey everybody, welcome to the first installment of the next portion of our AI in Focus series where we get into the implementation. I'm Thoughtbot developer and CEO Chad Pytel, and with me is Louis Antonopoulos. Louis, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And just a big thank you to the audience here. We're at our Ruby on Rails field, sponsored by FactoryBot, and deep inside the mind of ChatGPT. It's a crispy 50 degrees outside. Thoughtbot's won the coin toss and has accepted the ball.
And I see, Louis, that you've come sporting many microphones today.
That's right. One for each time zone.
And I appreciate the fact that they're golden microphones. It's like you've also gotten some sort of broadcasting award.
They're still coming in. I've got letters out to the Academy. Seriously though, thanks for inviting me here. I'm really excited to see what we're gonna do, and to work with ChatGPT some more.
Cool, awesome. So what we're going to be doing today is starting in an existing Rails app, adding the very first feature that does anything with an LLM. So we actually have the feature in production already, but we went back in our Git log to before that feature existed, and today we're going to do it again. So I can introduce what the feature is by actually showing it in production. So at Thoughtbot, we have a lot of documentation, both public and private documentation, most of it stored in Git repos. And here we have an internal application called Hub that shows those markdown files in a nice web interface. And we have a search engine that indexes all of that information, that documentation across various sources, and makes it available for searching in two ways, both in this command palette for searching, and also in this full page search engine as well. So because we have so much information, this is a problem a lot of companies face is, you have this search engine, you have a lot of information, but if someone can't find something or is curious about something in particular, we had the idea that it would be really nice if we could ask questions to an LLM about that internal database of knowledge. This is a kind of thing that a lot of products are doing today. A lot of client projects that were being brought on have at least some component of this. And the shape of the projects is somewhat similar, which is why I'm excited to start with this first session. And if you haven't done this, it's a great way to get exposed to a relatively straightforward LLM integration with a common problem, which is LLMs have a certain amount of information that they can hold in context. And so if you have a large repository of information or a data store or something like that, then you need to feed information or data to your LLM. You can't just dump the entire contents of your database and make it available to the LLM because it might exceed the context limit. And even if you're using an LLM and they have been increasing a lot the size of the context, for every piece of information that you put in context that is a token, that's how LLMs charge. So the more information that you give them, the more tokens you use, the more expensive your conversation is. So even in a world where we have infinite context possibility, we still probably want to put realistic limits on it so that we're not driving up our cost. So this idea of taking information from one source, finding the relevant information to the question that's being asked of the LLM, and just pulling that relevant information out, retrieving it from that data store, and giving it to the LLM is called retrieval augmented generation. And like programmers are wont to do, it has an acronym, and it's RAG. So that's what we're going to do today. Let's see the feature in action finished. So we have our handbook here. The question I always use is, how much time off do I get? How much time
And
off do...
Chad, right now, are you sharing screen?
Oh, thank you, Lewis. Keeping me honest here.
There we go.
So we have our handbook here with a lot of information. The search also searches our playbook and other documentation sources. So a question I often use as an example is, how much time off do I get? And so you can see it's now so this is interesting because one of the things with an LLM is that the answer is not always 100% consistent. So it is giving an answer, but it's not actually giving quite what I expected. What it's saying is, you can find the answer, how much time off do I get, in the paid time off policy, and it links it.
And so what you're going for here is trying to pull the information back rather than just a link to the document.
Yeah. So this is really interesting because this is different than I got when I answered this question before, but it is giving an accurate answer. And that's one of the things we're going to cover today, which is we fine-tuned the prompt to the LLM to make sure, well, we can't 100% make sure, but to make sure that it doesn't hallucinate or make up information. And so we've really sort of tried to lock it down. And this is important for like corporate responses in a professional environment and everything. You want them to be accurate. So in this case, it's almost not telling us the actual information. It's just telling us where we can find it, which is fine. And that's helpful. But it is interesting, and it's different than the results I was getting earlier today. So do you have another question, Lewis, you want to ask?
Yeah, I see. Do you have to give it any keywords to indicate that I want to do the LLM search? Because I also see that we're getting the search results.
Yeah, it shows the search results before. It triggers off of asking a question right now, so it's the question mark.
Okay, cool.
Do you have something else that you think might be a example?
No, I was going to ask about hallucinating in my own experiences with working with LLMs. I had it actually linked to or suggest that I read a Thoughtbot blog article that did not exist.
Yeah.
And I hadn't told it I was with Thoughtbot, and I was like, wait a minute. First of all, that's eerie. Second, are you sure that's a real thing? And on some further questioning, it explained, no, I was just trying to give you an idea.
Yeah, okay. Because if you're not familiar with how LLMs work, a gross oversimplification of them is just the probability that one word or token or letter will appear next to the other. And so when you take in with that, you can understand why it would generate a URL that doesn't exist, because it's like, using all the context of what I have, what is the probability that this URL exists, letter by letter, almost token by token?
Right.
Let's just make something up.
Should we dig into implementing it then, or do you want to keep digging into why the behavior is different here?
No. So here, one final example, we get a real answer. A product design sprint typically lasts around 2 weeks. Oh, cool. And you can see it is giving the specific URL that it comes from. So before we go into any AI implementation feature, one practice that we've been doing at Thoughtbot is we wrote this AI ethics guide. And it's more of a guided series of questions that you want to ask yourself as you're thinking about developing a feature and working on a feature. We're not going to, in the interest of time, we're not going to walk through each question by question, but you can check this out if you search for Thoughtbot AI Ethics Guide or go to our playbook. That's where it is. And it's about how we make sure that we understand how our systems work, that they're understandable to humans, that they're fair, that they preserve privacy of individuals and data. For a feature like this, that if we run through the questions, that's actually the biggest question that we might come away with, which is we're sending our private corporate information documentation to a third-party service. So we need to pay attention to, are the terms of that service reliable enough to be able to send this information and preserve the privacy? In the case of individuals, the data stores that we're using don't really have any personal information in them. It's all just Thoughtbot documentation and that kind of thing. So in the case of this feature, combined with the OpenAI terms of service, we've deemed that that it's okay. But this is quite honestly a common thing that we run up with, which is why in, I think, 2 sessions from now, we'll be looking at how you locally or on your own in AWS infrastructure host open source LLMs that can do the same sort of thing so that you're not sending your private information or individuals' private information to a third party. So what we have here is a fairly straightforward Rails app. As I said, there's no specific AI code in it yet, and it is that hub app that we were showing on screen. So we're going to get started from scratch. We're going to test drive the implementation so that we can see how that comes together. So for interacting with OpenAI, there's a gem that we often use. OpenAI is just a regular JSON API interface. So given you wanted to implement a direct connection to it yourself, it's actually fairly straightforward to use something like REST client or Faraday to code directly against it. But there's this gem called Ruby OpenAI, which abstracts some of that away into a nice Ruby wrapper. And it's actually built on top of Faraday. One of the benefits of using this Ruby wrapper is that even though it's called Ruby OpenAI, you can actually use it. You can point it at many different services, and so you can swap out. You can point it at Azure. You can point it at a Llama instance, which is a common server for running other open source models. And so that's really handy because, especially as we might want to change out our model or change out the LLM we're using to something on our own infrastructure, it means we don't need to rewrite the code. We just change the URL that we're pointing at and maybe some configuration options for OpenAI.
That's really convenient. Do you know, do they support the new models as they come out? Or is there a little bit of, how well maintained is this gem?
The gem is very well maintained, but the ChatGPT tends not to change the API. It's still on version 1, for example. So even as they've added new models, the API has not changed. You just have to specify a new model, and you'll see you do that with basically passing a string of the model name. So It's been pretty straightforward. So let's add the gem to our gem file. Does O come before T?
Sorting is important.
And then we'll bundle. So I think, so we're going to start off at the model level. We're going to introduce a model that knows how to take questions, find relevant documents from our search engine, and then send the question with that context to OpenAI and get back the response. One point I like to make here, and this is what we found on various client projects as well, is that if you look up like what a recommended solution for how to implement this kind of thing is going to be, what you're going to often find is the introduction of another service in your application or in your infrastructure that is an AI specific document store. And it's absolutely right that for the optimal solution, you would want to take all these documents and put them in a data store that when you ask for relevant information, it's like using artificial intelligence or the algorithms behind it to pull out the most relevant information. The reality is that adding new databases and that kind of thing to your infrastructure, especially at an enterprise, takes time and effort and money and might take a really long time. And so the ability to find the angle in and use something that exists already, even if it's not 100% optimal, I think is important to moving forward. And so that's what we're doing here. We have this existing search engine. It's using Elasticsearch. And so part of what I did when we originally started thinking about this feature is I did some tests where I just took a question, gave it to Elasticsearch, and looked to see whether it was returning the relevant pages. And in our case, it was. And that's also what we found to other clients as well, is that we're able to use existing infrastructure to get back some information to provide as context, which is actually very usable. So we have the gem now, and I think we'll call this a prompt class. So let's write the spec. Start writing the spec first.
Also, Chad, I'm going to drop from the stream and rejoin. It's not letting me see the chat, so I will be right back.
Oh yeah. Speaking of chat, though, we are looking at the chat. If you have any questions or comments along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. Welcome back.
Thank you. And I fixed it.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to touch the spec file. So in general, so we created this prompt class, and I think the API for this is flexible. I don't know about you, but when I'm test driving, one of the benefits of TDD is being able to sort of like see how the API is going to work and to know that it's making sense from a consumer perspective. And when I'm saying API here, I'm talking about the API for our prompt class that's going to be used in the application. So, with like a question, and it'll be like.
And conceptually speaking, what is this prompt model going to be responsible for?
This prompt model is going to be responsible for getting the relevant documents from our search engine, building a context, and sending the question along with that context to the LLM.
All right.
So just in terms of API, we can, that there's going to be an adder accessor for that text. And then, we run the spec for that. It's going to fail because we haven't created the class yet. And so we'll get into this feedback loop of writing the spec, doing the minimal thing to make it pass. That's my goal as I get started writing this code. So now I've created the model. And so I've just filled out the class, and now I'm getting wrong number of arguments given one when trying to call new. So the default initializer only takes no arguments. So actually, I think maybe this shouldn't be allow nil. So now we're getting undefined method text for instance and prompt on this thing when it's trying to use prompt.
So now we need an accessor.
Yeah.
Can it just be a reader?
Sure. We can do anything we want to our heart's desire. So now we're getting nil, so we need to assign that. And I think this is going to pass.
Should be viewing. Sweet.
Nice. So this is sort of like it's in the models directory, but it's more like a service object. It's not going to save and that kind of thing. And so my preference when I have a class that, unless I'm trying to get it to really behave like an active record object, to not mirror that API too closely. And so it might be something like a perform method in order to do its job. And so what we said it was going to do was it builds the context. I'm just going to write this out here. It builds the context, sends the prompt and context to the LLM, and returns the response. That might be too much for one spec, but
okay, let's break it down.
Yeah, exactly.
Chad, especially as you're leaning into perform, is this going to be run eventually by a job, or is this going to be handled sort of inline?
It actually could be done either way. If you remember the UI here,
but it's like you
type what's actually happening is that's when this widget here is detecting the question mark, and it is doing a JavaScript separate request to a prompt endpoint, which is finishing in the time. So we're not offloading to a background job because it is finishing within the time that is reasonable.
Okay.
But there are times where what we would actually want to do is basically that same request, but what that actually does is trigger I'm blanking on the active channel, action cable webhook, where it is happening in the background, and then the job updates the page or something like that. But for our purposes, for this request, we can keep it a little bit simpler than that. So in terms of the infrastructure for the search engine that's built into this, like I said, that's based on Elasticsearch. So we already have some factories and that kind of thing for working that. If we look at the search model, you can see that model does implement active model, and it's a class for querying and getting the results from Elasticsearch. So we're going to use that class in our prompt class to find the relevant documents. We also, you can see it, see if we go to search spec, we can see that we have a factory for creating results that search returns. And when we use this factory, it is using the result model, but it's actually not saved to the into the Postgres database. It's saving to the Elasticsearch database. So in our spec, we can create a document that we expect to match our question. It gets inserted into Elasticsearch, and that way the prompt class can use it and pull it out, and we can make sure that it's working as expected. So if we create a result, so these things, I'm going off of some notes and some memory. I work on this app a lot, so I sort of have a sense of what it is, but so we're going to put a document into the database, and then we're going to exercise, and we can keep it pretty simple with, like, if we just put test here, then this should match this result here. We've said that it's going to send the prompt and context to the LLM and return the response.
Should this return an array of results, or does it just return like the top? Does it return just the top? Its top find.
This is going to return the response from the LLM.
Okay.
So in this case, it's going to be just the string of the LLM's response.
Got it.
Yeah. I think ultimately what we'll want like a response object that we can like know whether it succeeded or failed or those kinds of things. But what we're ultimately going to do for this spec is we don't want to actually talk to the LLM in our specs. So we're going to stub out the OpenAI service. So what we are expecting to get back there is the LLM response. Now, so we can write OpenAI client equals double. No, that's not how we write that. We're going to allow OpenAI client to have received.
We have a question from the stream asking if this will be available to watch on YouTube afterwards. And I believe, as you explained to me, these are kept in perpetuity.
They are. They'll be on our YouTube channel. So thanks for the question. And yeah.
And I will share a link to that channel.
Okay, so if you haven't seen this before, what we're doing is we have this OpenAI client. We're using mocking, stubbing, whatever, to replace some existing methods on that class with ones that return our mock. And so we're saying when you call new on OpenAI client, we're going to get our fake one. And that allows us to then, so if we go over to the way that the gem works, we look at some example, the way you use it is you call new to get a version of the client, and then to ask it questions you call .chat with your parameters, and then you're going to give it the model that you want to use. You're going to give it the message that you're sending, and optionally, you give it a temperature. So a temperature is how sort of random or creative you want the response to be.
Do you know what is the range? Like 0 is
0 to 1, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And which one means don't get creative at all?
1.
Okay.
That's what we're going to use. The default is 1, and we'll use that one. We should maybe change it down to 0 just to see what craziness it returns.
I would like to see that.
Okay, so I lost my train of thought. So one thing that I do one of the great things about TDD is when you lose your train of thought, you can just run the spec and see how it fails, and that'll get you back on track. So undefined method and return. Oh yes, it's and returns. To receive and return. To receive and return. Okay, so undefined method perform for an instance of prompt.
Awesome.
So while we're here, we might as well write the rest of the spec. So here's the API. So I'm just going to copy this. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be expecting OpenAI client to have received, and the method is chat, and we'll have expect it to receive with, and then I'm just pasting the parameters. We've got something. Yeah. So this is what we're shooting for in terms of having something like this called. Now, the example code from the OpenAI gem uses GPT-4o LLM.
Looks like there's one more required comment we could probably get rid of for the test.
Yeah, good call. So, so now we're mocking out what the chat method returns from the LLM. So what we know is we want it to basically be the LLM response. So if we go over here, we can see, where is it? Here, I scrolled down too far. So this returns hash in an array with a message with some content in it, and we can dig that out of the response. So, so what it's returning there is, here, let's do this. This is ultimately what we're shooting for. So we can do
choice key,
then an array, then a message, then content. And what did we say? We said the LLM response. Okay, so I don't expect this to pass, but I want to make sure we don't have any syntax errors.
Yeah, I'd expect this to die on the perform line still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we haven't implemented anything yet, but we've set up a mock so that we're not actually talking to the remote LLM in our specs. And we've defined how we're going to use the prompt class, and that we are expecting some things. This is going to fail because the content of what's being sent to the LLM is in no way related to what we're ultimately going to do. Okay, so let's go over to our prompt class, and we're going to introduce a perform method. So really, I could get ahead of myself and run, but this TDD loop, the error we had was perform. Now the perform method exists, but nothing's being returned from it. So now we can start to implement actually talking to the LLM.
Now this might get into some TDD philosophies here. But if I were doing this, I would have it just return the string we want it to return.
Yeah.
Just get to like a green state and then come back and like have it actually do the thing.
I love it. So now the failure that we're getting actually tells us even more specifically exactly what we should be doing, which is we expected the OpenAI client to have received that method, and we didn't. In fact, it highlights to me deficiency in the specs is we should have said expect OpenAI client. In general, you want an expectation for everything you allow. So the fact that we didn't get so that is and that's even going to further guide us in terms of what we should be doing in our code. So now we want to instantiate the OpenAI so the way that the OpenAI client is configured, you need an API key in order to make requests. The way that it's configured is you can either do a configuration sort of file or you can pass it as access token here. For our purposes here, we'll pass it here. And that before we add that, we want to set up an expectation that it's happening that way. So we're going to do this as an environment variable. I forget what I need. I'm not going to show it on the stream because it's an actual private credential. So I set it up in advance. Yeah, OpenAI API key. But that's going to be nil if we don't have it set. What were you going to say, Lewis?
I was going to ask might that still be displayed if you run the test and it says I expected to receive this, but what I got was this, and then show the key as well?
Yes. Yeah. So what we're going to do actually is going to solve that problem, which is we're going to use a gem called that Thoughtbot makes called climate control.
Love me some climate control.
And that allows you to override config variables in your spec so they can be determinate. Because, for example, if we didn't have this set and our code was this way, it would be nil on both sides, and therefore it would still pass even if it wasn't really actually working correctly.
Also, quick note on the back in our prompt model, in the private method, I think there's a space where we're trying to do an or equal there.
Cool, thank you. So climate control. I think it's .modify. Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm taking a quick look. Climate control.modify, I believe is correct. Looking at the README now. Yeah, climate control modify.
Nice, got it in one.
Sweet.
We actually might need this all the way up at the top of the spec. Let's do that just for good measure.
Sure. Also, one thing I want to call out with climate control in tests, an important thing to remember is that it always reads, if your code always reads from the environment variables and you're counting on an environment variable to, let's say, be an optional thing, like we'll check the environment variable, but if it's not there, then use this other thing. Your tests will look at your local environment. So if you're using it to modify something for all your tests, like you might actually then need to explicitly say, set that key to nil. Otherwise, you're not testing what you think you're testing because it's literally reading it from your environment.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so let's run this and see what it does. Cool. So it expected access token, the new to be called with access token. It happened 0 times, and that's because we don't have it yet.
So if you really want to be safe, you could unset it from your local environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, it does say what we were expected it. Oh, that's because we're not actually calling client yet. Do you remember what it was? Parameters.
I'm not offhand, sorry.
Model. I forget what model we said. GPT 4.0. Messages. Actually, I'm just going to copy this.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with copying and pasting.
And do we need to then have a text parameter unperformed? Are we passing that in?
It's initialized.
It's the initialized. Oh, got it.
Good question though. So now what we got back is the whole hash. So we need to pull out I really like, well, I don't love using dig, but I often forget that it also works across arrays by putting a number there. It's sort of like whenever I get reminded of that, brings a little smile to my face. So we expected, oh, see, I messed something up. Choices, 0, message, content. No, that's what I have. Choices, 0, message, content.
Is it a string symbol situation?
Probably. Yes, that is the problem. The API for ChatGPT uses...
In their example there,
yeah, it's because we're mocking our JSON symbols. Yeah.
Yep. We're getting closer.
We expected it to be called with the access token, and that did not happen.
where we initialize it.
I don't see.
What if we hard code an access token there like ABC and see if we see that coming back? Okay.
Okay. So that means climate control. I had a typo. API key versus API token. And the actual thing in our environment is key. So,
Nice.
so the specs were working. It was us that was broken. That would make a good t-shirt. The specs are working. It's me that's broken.
I'll get right on that.
Okay, so now we're failing because we're passing the text pass in instead of hello. So that's good. That's what we expect. Cool. So we have a passing prompt class. So now, if this is our local code, if we go to console, what's going to happen is we haven't done any searching of the database yet. We're not giving any context. We're not doing anything, but we should have something that we can talk to OpenAI with and get a response. So what do we want to ask it?
Do you like AI?
So as an AI, I don't have feelings or preferences, but I'm here to help you with any questions or information you need about AI or any other topic.
Fantastic.
Cool. So it's working. It's working like we expect. Hopefully that wasn't too painful. We now have a prompt class, which we can begin to build out with context so that it is able to answer the questions that we give it.
Chad, I had one last question about the test. As we started writing it out, we created a result with a test handbook result. Is that parameter important for this, or can we just like accept the factory defaults, given that we're stubbing out the response anyway?
What I want to do is make sure that it's a good question. The search working properly is a separate object. So in theory, we could also stub out the search. I think it's sort of a matter of preference of how much mocking you want, because it is part of the system. We can run it locally. I would personally be inclined to insert a document into it, make sure that we're exercising it. But to be you're right. We don't technically need. There's no technical reason why we need to do that. So what we want to do now, assuming that is okay, is we want to begin to have the so
actually, before you make more changes, can we commit what we've done so far?
Good call.
I always like to have a green test and commit then.
So what did we do? Initial
prompt class.
Cool. Okay, so what I was going to do was start to compose what we actually expect this to look like. So like I said, we have refined the prompt a little bit to try to lock down hallucinations and to return those links that of the pages that it is finding this from. So this required a little bit of experimentation, but what we arrived at was using only the information provided above. Answer the following question and provide the URL where the answer can be found. And here we expect test to be, and then the format of the information that we're providing was, so it's like the test handbook result. So the title of the page, the URL, let's do an example. And then the body of the, so we insert into our search index the full body of the markdown file in a description field. So what we're doing is we're setting up a spec that just is going to feed the context in appropriately from the search results, and then do that. So this is going to fail because we haven't done any of this prompt setup. Undefined method content. So now you can see it's expecting to get that full big prompt with all the information that we set up, and it's not happening. So let's go over and make it happen. So I remember back at the beginning of this whole thing, we had a search class, which the way that works is you initialize it, and then you perform, you initialize it with a query, and then you perform against the index to get the results.
Had another question and coming in asking about where the video will be. It's resharing the answer there.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome, if Adam. Anybody has any questions along the way in terms of, what you're seeing or approaches to something, please don't hesitate to drop it in chat. We're happy to pause and answer it.
For those of you just joining, the score is 17-7. Thoughtbot in the lead, but ChatGPT has the ball.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is the interface for search is search.new, and then that query or queue. And the text is going to be just what the user is asking. So in this case, it's text. And then the interface, if you remember from looking over at that other for the class, it takes in a bunch of filters. Those are the things that the document stores that we want to search. Actually, I need to look at what the collection actually is. Okay. So we have a model in our application, which is the GitHub repositories that should be indexed. So we're just going to do all of them. And it has an attribute called result type on it. So this is going to search all the GitHub repositories, or the indexes of all the GitHub repositories that we have hooked up to our search.
Where's that hookup going to happen eventually? Or is that like already predefined in the repository model?
That's a good question.
Just because I can imagine someone else wanting to do this, and this is a pretty big leap from like how to get from one step to the next.
Well, I think it's a really good question, and it's important to go back to that point I was making before. One of the reasons why we're able to do this so quickly is because we actually have a search engine that we're able to piggyback off of. So if we didn't have that, we'd need to build out that whole search engine. We might use a vector database, those kinds of things, but we're able to use our Elasticsearch. This is a pre-existing search class that we already have in the, but this makes me believe, your question, Lewis, makes me believe that the interface for this is if nothing is returned as filters, then everything is included as filters. And the fact that it's set to an empty array, if it's not set, reinforces that. Yeah, see, if any filters defined, then define which to filter on. So if there is none, then it's going to include all of them.
Which was, and again, in our context, that's like messages and the handbook and other things as well.
Right. And so by writing this, we're making the real code only limit to the GitHub repos, but our specs, that's going to be an empty array, and it's going to do all of them. So for our purposes, in order to avoid any confusion, let's just do this right now in our code, because that was, like you said, that was a leap in terms of limiting it to only those repositories. And the effect is of that change of leaving that off is that it's gonna do everything, but we're only inserting some results. So does that make sense?
Oh yeah, sorry. Totally.
Okay. No, it's okay. And so what we're going to get back is a series of result objects. I assigned it to a documents array. So this is where what we were talking about, a tokens count. So for our purposes, or I like to think of tokens, it's not exactly per word, but it's sort of like a word when it comes to the math behind how LLMs work and what they distill the information down to find that something is the same or similar. And that's actually how they charge too. So it's by the token. So even in a world where we have unlimited context, we still probably want to limit the amount of information that we're returning. And that's important because if you've used Elasticsearch before too, you know that Elasticsearch returns all matching documents, even down to like basically no match. So what we're going to do is by going through and the documents in relevance order or top hits first, we're going to fill up the context until we get to the token limit that we set. We're going to populate the context with all the documents up until the point where we hit the token limit. So we're automatically not including all results in the context.
Chad, this might be a good point to ask. Before we started the stream, we were talking a little bit about like which model to use, and I think you were saying that in our production system we're using 3.5
turbo. Yeah,
the 3.5 turbo. My experience, at least my understanding, is that the older the model, the less expensive it is.
That's correct. Yeah.
But you were also saying like it's just as good as using like the 4.0.
What I actually found when testing was that 4.0 produces more natural results in its answers, but it tended to be a little bit harder to get a consistent answer from because it's a better model. And for our purposes, it's actually nice to have a more straightforward, simple lockdown answer. And so I was actually happier with the responses I was getting from 3.5 turbo than I was from 4.0 for the purposes of this.
Got it.
Now, next time, in next week's session, we're going to do using getting and using structured data from the LLM. So if you notice now, what we're doing is we're just getting back a string that is the response. But we could tell ChatGPT to give us back JSON formatted responses in a particular schema format, and it will do that. And there's benefits to doing that, and that's part of what we're going to do in a future session.
That sounds exciting. All right, moving on.
So what I found was that so the original, when we started implementing this, I think the token size limit for 3.5 turbo was something like 4,000 tokens, maybe 8,000, with some experimentation. And this is, experimentation that you can do with the class by setting this variable. It's going to pack the context with information up to the limit. What I found was that about 3,800 tokens was enough to give the LLM all the information that it needed in terms of the context for the documents that we have, and to be able to get good answers back. So that came from experimentation. It also leaves room for the prompt because it's not anywhere near the actual limit of the model. So the way that this works is we're going to write a loop that loops through the documents that we got and puts them into the context. We're basically building a string. So we can do context equals. So we'll start an empty context, and then we can say documents. Actually, I know because I'm looking at my notes. We don't want to write it using .each because we need to exit out of the loop when the context is hit, and so a better way to do that is with a while loop. So while the current document is less than documents.length. So the way that you get a token count, there's basically two ways to get a token count of a string. One, we could actually ask our model. There's a method on OpenAI client to get token count. You can see it in the so here's the method, rough token count. And if you need a more accurate count, you can try tick token Ruby. So tick token Ruby is a separate gem that has accurate token counts for different models, or more accurate token counts for different models. For our purposes, the rough token count method should be fine. So we'll use that here, and we won't introduce tick token Ruby, but it's a good gem. We've used it before. And so if you're looking for more accurate token, if you find you need more accurate token counts, this honestly, it used to be a little bit bigger of an issue because the context limits were low. And we needed to be really careful that we didn't go above them, because if we go above them, it results in an error from OpenAI. Now that the token counts are a lot higher, they've increased from like 4,000 to 32,000, I think. It's far less likely that we're going to hit them. And I know, because we set the limit at 3,800, that we're not going to go anywhere near, even with a rough token count, we're not going to go near it. So
I know we're a little bit deep here. I just wanted to check: are we at the point where we're fixing a failing test, or are we creeping ahead of our tests?
We're making a test pass.
Okay, great.
We're going to build we have to build the context with the results. Thanks for keeping me honest. I'm not sure that at this point there's a way to make this test pass without actually looping through the results, unless we just fake it and we put it right in the string of what we expect there.
I'm kind of curious where you're going. I say keep plugging along.
So actually, what we could do is not worry about the token. We need to limit. Otherwise, it's going to loop through every single. Well, okay, we're only setting up one document in our specs. So we could write. And then yeah, this is actually a good way to do it. So thanks.
Sure.
Thanks for that. What have I done? Oh, I'm missing the space there. I'm writing this way to just keep it on the screen and not make the line get too long. So I'm assigning it to a variable before appending it. But so we have document as name,
URL. What was the last one? Body.
It was description, actually.
Description.
So if we add the context to the text, we can see it's going to still fail, but we're going to be able to see how it fails, and that'll show that we've hooked things up right, but also that it, I have a syntax error. Undefined method each for an instance of search. So it showed that we hadn't hooked things up right. For an instance of search. Oh, it should be perform. Okay, Elasticsearch transport error, bad request. Text fields are not optimized for operations that require per document field data. I think my Elasticsearch index is not set up properly, which is unfortunate. Rather than deal with that right now, I think we're going to take what you were suggesting previously, Lewis, and we can stub the result.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So allow search to receive new in return, and that's going to be a double, and it has a method called perform, and that returns the result. Cool. That's a good way to not get completely blocked on the Elasticsearch setup.
Awesome.
Okay, so what we're seeing is we get the title, the URL, the description, just like we're expecting, but then we're expecting to have the prompt there, and we don't.
So back to the model.
Mm-hmm. Prompt is a little awkward, but it's fine.
Prompt question.
I'm just going to copy and paste this from our spec so we can get the wording correctly. We have a typo here, though. So we add it to what we're sending. So it looks like it's close, but not quite. We need 2 new lines there after the, so we had a new line here. What's actually happening is this space here. A little fiddly.
Almost there.
Almost.
It's like a trailing.
Yeah.
The carriage return. It's like one extra and one missing.
I actually don't know off the top of my head whether there's a Ruby thing to chomp that new line that's right here off. Do you know?
Offhand, no. We can certainly try it.
Or we could just say chomp.
Let's chomp.
Oh, there's a new line here.
So can we just
Boy,
add
we've
that?
really gotten ourselves into a fiddly sort of string comparison thing here. Okay, I have a solution to this problem.
Okay.
Wait, let's make sure okay. Context and no, let's just call it prompt. And it's a reader. So let's make a private. Okay, so if we set up the context, then we're doing an adder variable there. And then here,
Do we need to change the adder name there? The accessor.
yep. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, this one's correct. This is context,
That one.
Then we have the content.
Got it.
I don't know if we're going to get the same string. We'll probably not have it 100%, but it's closer now. Okay. We have 3 new lines after the description. 4 new lines after the description. This is the hardest thing we've done today.
Looks like 1 extra after page description. Okay, now we're back to 1 trailing carriage return. Our new line.
Oh, and that's because we added the chomp here. And we don't need it anymore because they both have the same thing.
Yay.
Whew.
Let's commit that.
We did it. Compose, context, and prompt. Okay, so now if we go to our console, we're running in development mode now. You can see what. What happened here? The server responded with the status of 429.
And we got a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah, that's because it's printing out the search results that it's pulling back. OpenAI 429 response.
Too many requests.
That is not what I would have expected. I know. I bet that we don't have this set up. Now it's 400. Someone at Thoughtbot is probably using the key and I don't know.
There's a link there about towards the bottom. Also, one thing I noticed is that it looks like some of those responses that it's grabbing more than what we wanted.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't look like a handbook document, and so I'm wondering if we're passing it.
We don't have that's right. It's because we removed the limit. Now I'm running against a real local Elasticsearch index with the full results. So it's matching tons of documents, and it's filling the context with too much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna do first 5, just to see whether it works. Cool. So this is a case where we're getting what we want to see from the system overall, which is we didn't provide, according to this, we didn't provide context that has the answer. And so this is confirmation that it's not making something up in that case. It's saying the information provided doesn't mention anything about time off for employees. Therefore, the answer cannot be found with the information provided. That's good. That's the kind of thing that we want to see rather than it making something up.
And for sure, if we had more time, I would definitely add a test for that exact scenario.
Yeah. So I believe that the reason why what's happening here is we need this because we're running now locally against a real we need to limit which sources it's showing.
Can we limit to, when you were looking at, there's another document, I don't remember which one it was, but it showed like the different options. Can we specify handbook?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So, so we have just a couple of minutes. So the way that we would do this is we would loop here, and we would, this is the while.
Also, for anyone watching along and looking at that response, we actually get more than 15 days of paid time off.
Yeah. So
we have a benefits page.
Yeah. So we get significantly more than 15 days off. But I think that might be part of what we hard coded what it was done, and I think that may be incorrect. And It's pulling something else. So what we would do here is we'd loop through the documents. And so what we want to do is we want to be checking the size of the context. OpenAI. So we want to make sure that rough token count is less than max token count. But we need to make sure that the rough token count of the context plus the document we would be adding to the context is lower. So we want to OpenAI.
Plus, does the prompt also need to be figured in, or is it small enough to not matter?
We set this to account for the prompt.
Okay.
But yeah, you could also compute it, but you would, it's not super expensive to compute it, but if we had it as part of the loop, it'd be computing the token count for the same text.
Sure.
Every time. So plus the rough token count. What was it? We need to get that, so we would extract that to a method, but so we would extract this to a method to get the document that we want to put into the context, and we would compute the token count about that.
Each time we go through the loop, sure.
Each time we go through the loop. And if we're going to bust out of the context limit that we said, then the while loop will automatically end and move on. So that's it for today. That's our time. I hope this was helpful to people to really seeing what the APIs for using OpenAI look like, how we use them in Ruby and Rails, how we can use an existing search engine that we already have to pull out relevant documentation to do RAG against the LLM. Anything else to add, Lewis?
No, this was super helpful. I haven't played with any part of the ChatGPT API yet, and so it's really nice to see how easy it is to get going. And
I think if there's
like
one takeaway from this that I hope people can do is that all this stuff, when it comes down to it, LLMs are super powerful and super exciting, but they're just an external service that you can use. And so, but with a gem, it's in our jobs today, we're programming against external services or APIs all the time. We don't need to be machine learning experts in order to build this stuff. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to dig further and further into the capabilities, and I hope people follow along and join us.
Thanks
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.